My name is Marcy Leemore, and I work at the Carolina Alumni Association. I am so thrilled that you all decided to join us today, that many of you registered, that you're actually here, and I appreciate your flexibility with us last week when we needed to reschedule. Um, of course, as I often say, you are not here to hear any of our staff. And so I will very quickly turn it over to our wonderful and dynamic and so personable career coach, Catherine Tuttle. Before I do that, I want to just quickly thank all of our Carolina alumni members, because, of course, without your membership, webinars and other events that we're able to put on that we hope are appealing to you and helpful for you would not be possible. So, Catherine, thanks for being here.
Thanks so much, Marcy. I'm happy to be here. And this was clearly a topic that hit home with a lot of people based on the questions that came in and the registrations that came in. I want you to know that I went through all of your questions and tried to include them all in here throughout the presentation. But if, as we're going through things, you have questions, feel free to chat them in, and Marcy will pop in and awesome. Let me know. So I think this is also really good timing because summer is officially over. Kids are back to school, and the hiring process is going to start to pick back up, and things that may have sat for a little while due to people being on vacation and other time constraints in the summer are going to start to move. So hopefully this will help you if and when you have an offer coming soon. So I want to start off by just setting the stage here a little bit. 55% of people do not negotiate salary or other benefits when they are offered a position. But 93% of people who negotiated ended up getting more, and that can add up to a lot of money over the course of your career. So I would encourage you that when you do get an offer to take time to review it, to think about it holistically, and be willing to have a conversation with the hiring manager or the recruiter about how you would like to move forward. And I don't want to harp on this too much because I know that this session is about negotiations, but I want to be clear that to set yourself up for success, negotiating an offer, you really need to perform well in the interview. You know, other candidates can beat your qualifications, but they can't beat your preparation and they can't beat your enthusiasm. So do your research on the company. Know what their solutions and services are. Know, what's fueled their growth over the past year, and have a sense of what their core mission and values are. Look up your interviewers in advance on LinkedIn. I always get questions about this, about whether that's okay. Definitely look them up, check out their profile, see if there's anything that you can maybe connect on a personal level. Likability is is huge. We don't want to underestimate the importance of that. So maybe you have similar connections in common, or you went to the same undergrad, or you attended a conference recently. These are things that you can bring up and hopefully start a conversation around. And then finally, ask good questions. Show that you are committed to this, that you are prepared, and that you are the person for the job. And we got a lot of questions around this about salary. And when do you talk about it? How do you talk about it? All those things. So first of all, unfortunately, a lot of companies now within their online applications will ask you to provide a salary range. If they do, if you can write something versus put a number in, then I would try to write negotiable. If they require numbers, try 0000 or 9999. Like, this represents a willingness to negotiate further down the line. If those don't work and you are required to put a salary range in, then it is really important that you do your research and you understand what the market will bear, and that it is a range that you would be happy to work within. And I'm going to go into this in the next slide because I know there's going to be more questions about how you do the research. Let's say it's not required in the online application, but you get asked that in an interview. And this conversation is happening earlier and earlier. Even in the screener calls, what are your salary requirements? If possible, I would try to avoid giving your number, especially early on, because you're still getting to know each other and you haven't had the opportunity to really sell them on why you're the best candidate. If you get that question, I would try flipping it back to them. You could say something like, I understand that salary is an important part of the conversation. That said, if you could provide a hiring range, that would be really helpful. Most employers will give you that range, right? Nobody wants to fall in love just to have it all fall apart at the end because you weren't clear about what you both needed. So most people will give you that number or that range. If they won't, then try something like, I'm definitely negotiable on salary, but I've been interviewing at similar companies between a range of X and Y. Again, making sure that's a number that you feel good about, because if you guys both agree in the interview that you are happy within this certain range, it's going to be harder to kind of get out of that range later, if that makes sense. Now, how do you do the research? That's a good question. The first thing I would say is to look for job postings in states where employers are required to include salaries in their job description. So a number of states, I believe there are 8 of them, have enacted salary transparency laws, and this is a measure to try and close the pay gap between men and women and minorities. So Colorado, Connecticut, and New York are 3 of them. There are 5 more, and then there are 15 states that are currently considering a measure to make salaries transparent. Unfortunately, North Carolina is not one of them, but I know many of you live outside of the state. Even if your state doesn't have the transparency laws, you can go look for postings for roles in Connecticut and New York and Colorado. Get a sense of what the range is, and then adjust it for the cost of living wherever you are. That will require a little bit of additional research and number crunching, but it's a great way to get a sense of where the market is in general. Glassdoor, PayScale, Salary.com, these are definitely options as well. And Indeed just launched a new salary tool, additional data points, although they can unfortunately be all over the place, which is why the transparency laws are really helpful. For recent graduates, I would recommend the NACE salary calculator. NACE stands for the National Association of Colleges and Employers. And every year they survey employers and career centers within universities that are members of the organization, to get a sense of where recent grads are coming out. And you can actually type in your experience, if you did internships, the role you're applying for, where you're going to be located, and it will pop out a range for you, which is really helpful. And ultimately, the best way to truly get a sense of where companies of interest are from a salary standpoint is going to be speaking with people who are working in the organizations you're interested in prior to the interview process. We've done a lot of webinars and written articles about relationship building and informational interviews. And so I would suggest, if you're starting the process of looking for something, to go back and review those, and we talk through how to broach that conversation. And I know we got a lot of questions ahead of time about this. So before I go beyond the salary piece, do we have any questions chatted in?
Nope, not yet.
No. Okay. Okay. This was another question that came up a number of times in the registration. So what else is negotiable outside of salary? And there are lots of things. So these are some of the things that are popular in terms of negotiating. Bonus, of course, there's an annual bonus, but then there's also signing bonuses. It's important, and I was just talking with an alum about a negotiation last week who looped back, and she had a question for the recruiter after the offer about the annual bonus, whether she was eligible based on when she was joining in their fiscal year, and how much that was expected to be. And it turned out she was not eligible for it based on their fiscal year and her start date. So in that case, she was able to bring up the potential of a signing bonus to make up for that that year of annual bonus. Equity is very common, within startup organizations, also larger organizations. If this is a longer term benefit that can be paid out and be quite lucrative, but it's not a guarantee. So I think when you're looking at equity, it's important to consider, your risk tolerance, where you are personally, professionally, financially, and probably talk to somebody who's familiar with those types of agreements to really have a good sense before you commit to anything. Paid time off. You can always bring up, additional vacation days. Continuing education could be formal. We will give you X amount of money to pursue an MBA, or it could be, attending professional conferences, or it could be online courses through Coursera, but is there a stipend available? Work from home options. Can I work from home? Can I work from home 1 day a week, 2 days a week? If they offer 1 day, you can ask for 2. If you are working from home fully or partially, is there a stipend available for phone and internet? Relocation, maybe, relocation assistance might make up for, some of a desired, salary. Let's say they're, you were really hoping for 5 or 10,000 more. Maybe that could be made up through relocation benefits. And then parental leave. And I'm actually going to get into that in detail on the next slide, because that's something that was asked about, but also something that is a bit nuanced as well. So parental leave can be negotiated. Ideally, we do that before accepting an offer, but it is also something that you can negotiate in your current role. And I say parental leave very purposefully. I would say women, try to avoid calling it maternity leave, right? Or men calling it paternal leave. No, parental leave is something that has become more and more common, and it recognizes the fact that both men and women want time with children after they're born. And so I think it's important to use that more general term. If you receive an offer and an overview of benefits and parental leave is not included, you can ask, you can clarify, that with someone in HR or the hiring manager. And if it is not something that's offered, or if it's offered but not the ideal situation, like maybe it's 4 weeks, or maybe it's 6 weeks, and then after that you're not getting paid, you're using vacation time and all that. Those things can be negotiated, but it needs to be done up front, and you need to be ready with facts. What is the industry standard? What is the market standard? How will this help you recruit and retain top talent? And when you're asking, I think it's really important to be cognizant of how the hiring manager or HR person responds. If they're balking at it, or if they seem to be pushing it off, oh, that's something we can discuss later. That's something we're thinking about, but it's not anything we're ready to do. You need to know going into the negotiation phase whether that is a deal breaker for you, so that you can weigh, what they're offering or not offering, and how to move forward. And now just best practices for negotiating a job. First of all, and this is easier said than done, but this is a professional conversation. It is not a personal one. That said, kind of building on that, this is not something we do over email. I want to make that very clear. I get that question a lot. This is a conversation that we want to have over the phone, via Zoom, in person, whatever the case may be. Reach out to whoever gave you the offer, let them know, that you're excited, that you want to make this work, that you're ready to move forward, and set up a time to talk so you can go in with your questions. What do we need to clarify, right? We may want to know, something about the whether the bonus, like I mentioned earlier, you know, when does this get paid out? Am I eligible? What's the expected percentage? That type of thing. It may be, you know, is remote work an option? You know, are there people working remotely within the company? Any intel that you need to further negotiate going forward. And what I would say is that when you get the answers to those questions, if you're ready to move forward, you may say, great, if you can give me, a little bit more time, I'll follow back up with you tomorrow to move forward. But if you're ready to move forward with the conversation, it's important to be upfront about the things that you would like to negotiate and their order of importance to you. Right? What we don't want to do is keep saying one more thing, right? So yes, we can give you, we can move that offer up to 90,000. Great, thanks so much. Now I would like to talk about like vacation days. Okay, now I want to talk about this. This is not going to go over well. And oftentimes there's a conversation that needs to happen internally between the hiring manager and HR. So give them all the information that they need to assess what is or is not an option for your particular offer. And don't just ask for it, right? Don't just say, hey, I was really hoping for 90. 75 seems low. Be clear about why you deserve more. It may be your years of experience in the industry that is above what they're, looking for. It may be that you are highlighting, things that you talked about in the interview that are directly relevant to, their goals and how that makes you, able to come in and hit the ground running. Justify why you deserve what you are requesting. Any questions? Doesn't look like it, but I'm just checking in. I don't think so. So we'll keep going. Negotiating internally, whether that's asking for a raise or let's say you got an offer and you want to talk with your manager to see if you can get a counter offer. These two topics came up quite a bit. Again, this is a professional conversation that needs to happen in person. So set up a time with your manager. If you are, thinking about a raise, I think, coming into that annual review process, that's a really good time, maybe start the conversation a few months in advance so they know this is something you've been thinking about. And if it's, if you've gotten an offer and you're wondering about, how to move forward with your company, I would set up a meeting with your manager as soon as possible. Practice is key. This is a nerve-wracking conversation for a lot of people. And so the more you practice, kind of saying the things that you want to say out loud, the more comfortable you will be. I think it's important here to honestly assess your performance and to be able to justify why you're asking for more money or more PTO or more flexibility in your role. If you're asking for a raise, be clear about why. Is this a point where there's lots of turnover and you are a dedicated employee who is taking on more than originally expected. Maybe you're doing, and this happens quite a bit, you are hired for one thing and then you do all these other things. So it's important to be clear about that and have that conversation. Here's what we initially agreed to. These are the extra things that I've been able to accomplish and take on, which is why I'm asking for this additional money. For a counter offer, before you even broach that conversation, I think it's important to be honest with yourself about whether a negotiation will, address why it is that you were looking in the first place. There's a reason that you went all the way through from applying to a job to interviewing to getting an offer. 50 to 80% of people who accept a counteroffer end up leaving that company within 6 months to a year anyway. So I think it's important to have that honest dialogue with yourself and maybe get an outside opinion from somebody who's close to you. But if you decide, yes, I really would like to stay in an ideal world, then be clear with your boss about what you're being offered and what you would like to see to be able to stay. That could be salary, that could be any of the other things we talked about, paid time off, an extra day working from home, whatever the case may be, but be upfront about that so that they can determine whether that's feasible on their end.
Catherine, there are two questions that are very similar. I love when our alumni are on the same page that are sort of related to what you're saying or what you just finished saying, which is, what is your personal advice around should they accept a counteroffer? And you talked about the statistics that people leave. Their question, one of the questions is it common that companies essentially help you leave after you've accepted a counteroffer? Or that people maybe culturally know that now you were thinking about leaving, and so it's just not a great environment anymore?
So that's a great question. I would say the latter. Typically, again, there's a reason you were looking outside of the organization. Sometimes that is money. Maybe you've had that conversation with your boss and they've said, maybe that's something we can assess at the review. And you go back and say, hey, I've got an offer. I want to stay, but I need that additional compensation. That may solve the problem. That may be the only reason you were looking in the first place. But I think oftentimes it tends to be more of a cultural mismatch. So, your boss is not going to change their leadership style. Your coworkers are not going to magically disappear, that you are frustrated with. So it's really thinking through those things. And I don't think that it's, employers aren't pushing people out because they gave them more money. It's typically people realize, ooh, I made a mistake. I should have taken that other job.
And then there's another question, which is, do you have any, I'm going to slightly reword the question, but it's the spirit of the question is, what's your experience with people who have the conversation with the manager during the interview process versus after an offer? Can that, when do you have the most leverage? What is that conversation, or what might that conversation look like if it happens earlier?
Mm-hmm. So I think you have the most leverage when you have an offer. There is something concrete that you can put in front of your manager to say, hey, this is what I'm being offered somewhere else. You certainly can have the conversation prior to that, but there's less leverage on your end. But let's say, you feel like it would be, so I'm thinking of a situation where, someone was interviewing, didn't think, they were recruited for this position. They were going through the process. It didn't sound like what it initially was presented as. This person is thinking, I don't really want to move forward anymore, but how do I? So in that case, you could go to your boss and say, and I think this also depends on your relationship with them and other factors, but I was recruited for this position. This is what I understand it's providing XYZ that I'm not, and that could be growth opportunity too. Maybe, you feel like you're stuck in your company. We get really good at doing stuff, and managers don't have incentive to move you up within the organization. So it is possible to have that conversation proactively. It's just they may come back and say, let me know when you get an offer and we'll talk about it.
I want to add, there are lots of nuances to this. It will depend on who your manager is. Obviously, it'll depend on your industry and the culture. I had two recent graduates work for me a few years ago, and both came into my office at different points in time and said, I really love working here and I'd like to make more money. And so what I said to them, because of who I am, is give me the number that you would be hoping to make. And I can let you know whether I think that is feasible here, given your timeline, right? If you are, for example, if it's a 20% raise or a 30% raise or whatever it is, we have the type of rapport where I could very transparently say, here's what I think will be reasonable, even though I can't say it'll happen today or tomorrow, versus X. And then that gives an employee, again, depending on the culture, depending on the manager and the relationship, it does give you the ability to make a decision about whether you should start looking or whether this is a place or where you are is a place. Again, you'll have to gauge that based on the relationship with your manager and the culture. But to the point about it's not a leverage conversation. At that point, it's a partnership conversation where it's, I want my manager to be an advocate for me and to also understand what I'm trying to achieve without there being a, hey, I've got another offer and you have to match it. And then to Catherine's point, if you come with another offer, it is not surprising to the manager at that point. And if there is something that can be leveraged, that is when you have the best leverage, but it wouldn't be a shock and awe to the manager that you've now gotten a new job because you have had a very collegial, conversation on the front end about where you're hoping to be.
Great points. Thank you. We also got some questions about severance, whether or not it's, you're able to negotiate that. And if so, how do you go about that? First thing to keep in mind, getting to that, it's professional versus personal. It obviously, being let go feels personal. But it's important, when this is presented to you, that you try to stay calm and that you ask for time to review it. Do not sign anything right away. Even if you're looking at it on the surface, you say, yeah, that looks like I'll have, plenty of time to find a job based on what they're presenting here. Take the time to look it over and really think about your experience and your financial situation, and be ready to look for things to improve and help you make this transition. So if you have questions about anything, having somebody look it over, it doesn't have to necessarily be an employment lawyer, but if you can find someone who's familiar with contracts and these types of things, it's good to have somebody to ask questions and clarify. You need to determine based on the state you are in and their laws, and then, based on federal laws, what can and cannot be negotiated. And then, scrutinize your work and really, go back through performance reviews if you have them. If you've had stellar performance, if you've never had a disciplinary issue, if your boss for the past 6 years has said you have exceeded expectations, then use that as leverage to ask for additional money, additional time. Sometimes it can be negotiated that you stay on the insurance for a certain period of time. So definitely look things over, see what's most important to you, and then go in and have, again, a conversation in person where you can present this information and hopefully improve the outcome. And then these were just some kind of one-off questions that I got through the registration form. The first was around whether or not an offer might be rescinded if you try to negotiate it. This is very, very rare. It does happen every once in a while, but negotiating, while not everybody does it, like we said earlier, 93% of the time results in, more. It has a positive outcome. So I would not hesitate to ask for what it is that you want. I mean, most of the time, the worst that they can say is no. Occasionally, I think employers may have pause just kind of based on the way the candidate is negotiating. Perhaps they're getting a sense that you are not wanting to join the organization, or that you're negotiating just to negotiate, asking for one thing after another with no justification. That could, result in a negative outcome. But I think if you go through kind of the self-assessment process that we've been talking about and really go in, ready to have a reasonable conversation, outcomes should be positive. If you got an offer 2 years ago, should you expect more if you were offered the same position today? Yes. You have 2 more years of experience. Market has shifted, cost of living. I would, if they did offer you the same, I would do the same, process that we were discussing earlier. Here are the things that I've been able to accomplish over the last 2 years. Here's how my goals have changed, whatever the case may be, and justify it. But yes, they should absolutely be offering you more money. Career change can sometimes mean that perhaps we're taking a step back from a salary standpoint or a responsibility standpoint based on how big that change is, whether it's an industry change or a functional change or both. But this has become so much more common, and it really is, again, about identifying, the skills and competencies that you have that are transferable, and specifically to that role, and why that makes you the strongest candidate. I mean, remember, if you have an offer, they're to the point where they want you to join the organization. So let's think about, what's important to you, and kind of have that conversation going forward. And as a new graduate, can you negotiate? Yes, you can. Just, again, do your research, be ready to justify why you deserve more, And think about those things outside of salary that might be important to you, whether that's working remotely, relocation, signing bonus, all that good stuff. Just be ready to, propose some options that would, make you feel more confident in the offer. And I always like to give some recommended reading for at the end of our webinars. So Never Split the Difference is a fantastic book that will help you as you're preparing. Easy to find on Amazon, can be at your door tomorrow. And I also wanted to quickly highlight the webinar library that we have on the GAA site. Tons of content here on a number of different subjects. A lot of these things overlap, whether that's, self-assessment, whether that's, outreach and networking before you get to the interview process. So I would encourage you to visit that. And finally, if you want to schedule a coaching session, this is a very personal conversation, obviously, and sometimes we can talk at a high level over a webinar. If you are anticipating an offer or you get an offer, this is a great perk for you as a GAA member. Definitely when you reach out, let us know if it's a time sensitive issue so we can get back to you and get you on my calendar as soon as possible. But you just email alumnicareers@unc.edu. And also continuing to plug the Heels Engaged Network. This is a great networking tool. It's kind of like a mini LinkedIn for UNC alumni. So check that out if you haven't already. Marcy, I'm happy to take any more questions if there are any.
There are not. Sorry, I think, yes, the link I just sent in the chat box is actually the updated link. So sorry, everyone.
Oops.
I have not given Catherine our updated link for the Heels Engaged Network. We've changed where some things are found since our new rebranding, which we are all still figuring it out ourselves. So either way, if you search for it, you will find it. But the link I dropped in the chat is probably the more direct way to get to the Heels Engaged Network. The coaching sessions are still as printed. So one thing I'll just add, wait, I see a question. Great. How do we negotiate a better salary and title after completing graduate training for something that you've already been doing part-time?
I'm not sure I understand that.
So I think what I understand is you are working a part-time job, and while you're at the job, you go and get additional education. And so how do you come back and get a higher salary and maybe a different title for now that you have more training or more education in the same job?
Yeah, so I think that would be where you are having a conversation with your supervisor, your manager, to be clear about the skills and experience that you've gained through your additional education. So oftentimes there are, there's the knowledge that you gain through the classes. And then there's experiential learning. So if there were projects that you worked on that are particularly relevant to your job, that would be something you could highlight. Making sure that they have a good sense of, again, what you learned and how you applied that, and then how you would apply that on the job, which justifies the title and the salary increase. And I would say ideally, if possible, if you're thinking about getting additional education, having that conversation with your supervisor in advance to help them understand why and help proactively create a plan with them for, applying that knowledge on the job, and then what your goals are, moving forward as you progress.
There's another question I will add to what Catherine just said is just remember that budgets are set in timelines that don't always align with your education. So being proactive about that is really important because there may be a set budget until there's a new budget cycle. And so managers don't always have the ability to have fluctuations around that, but knowing that that is coming might help them be able to help you as well. So that's a little higher level thinking, but just something to keep in mind that in all companies, you can't immediately implement a salary change.
Right. Good point.
Two questions. One is, do you have any different tips for negotiating in healthcare? In healthcare, they usually work with HR who may not actually understand the ins and outs of a particular role.
Mm-hmm. So I think that is very true. And it's not just healthcare. I would say in many cases, HR is a tactical function that is posting and leveling and, but doesn't work within that department or have a sense of what that role is. In those cases, I think it's important. Oftentimes, they will be feeding that conversation back to the hiring manager, right? And working with them to figure out what is feasible. Ideally, you'd have any negotiation conversation directly with the hiring manager. But if not, and I would be very clear again about why you're asking for what you're asking for, why you feel like you deserve what it is you're requesting. And I would probably follow up with that in writing over email so that the HR person can go back to the hiring manager and see what can be done.
There's another question. If I don't quite get this, would you, Leslie, type in a little more context? The question is, why would you get more education if your employer is unwilling to pay for extra training? And the comment, it seems like more education would be great leverage for a better paying job.
So is it worth getting additional education if your company won't pay for it?
That's what I'm trying. I think that's what Leslie is asking, but I'm not entirely sure. Leslie, are you asking, for example, should you get more so that you can leave the company? Or are you saying, why would you do it at all if you're wanting to stay and they don't pay? Probably a little 20-second clarification in the Q&A would be fantastic. Mm-hmm. And I'll add a point about something else previous, Leslie, while we wait on you to type. Earlier, one of the questions was, could you have a job offer rescinded? And one of the things I will just say is many years ago, I actually had a job offer rescinded. And one of the things that I walked away from the process recognizing was that the types of questions I was asking, and I can't tell you why the offer was rescinded because the company didn't actually say, but a lot of the things that I was asking were things that really mattered to me as a person. It was around what the flexibility was going to be. It was around, hey, we're going to make an aggressive move for this job. What is my ability to handle some personal details once I actually start the job, because they wanted me to start in 30 days. Mm-hmm. And so I say that to say, also be clear, as Catherine was saying, be clear on why you want to leave a place. Be clear about where you want to go and what type of culture you want to go to, because even though that job offer was rescinded, what I recognized is in that process, it was so exciting, but I didn't really have a good sense of the culture. And the questions I was asking was actually revealing things about the culture that I hadn't picked up on. in the interview, but that they were important to me. And so sometimes a no is if you're a person of faith, is a good thing instead of a bad thing. So don't be down if an offer is rescinded. Recognize it might be just saving you from something else that you might like worse than where you currently are.
Yeah, being very clear about what you need to have and what's nice to have, and being throughout the interview process and then in the negotiation process, being cognizant of how, what type of response you're getting and how it's coming across, because that can reveal things that maybe were missed previously.
Okay, Leslie is saying, should more education, or I guess more education should optimally translate to a better position internally or externally. Would you agree?
Yes, we want to go in, and we did a whole webinar on graduate school and additional education, and we could certainly have a whole coaching hour session around this. But yes, ideally, you want to go into, a master's degree or any additional education with a specific goal in mind and an understanding of how that will, enhance your career going forward. Just getting a degree to get a degree is not going to, it might be very interesting personally, but it's not necessarily going to help you professionally if it's not purposeful.
There's a question, and my assumption of the question is they're saying if you stay internal, it says, how do you prepare for jealousy that would come from coworkers? In my personal experience, it hurts work relationship and project collaboration. So I think I infer from this that's not stated is, if you get a raise or a promotion or a new title, how do you manage that in an existing company with existing relationships?
Mm-hmm. That was a really good question. Unfortunately, what's coming to mind is it depends so much on company culture and existing relationships. I know, especially when a peer is promoted above, others at their level, there can be some resentment. I think in general, open communication is really important, and asking, being clear that you are coming in, as a partner, and while you may have gotten a raise, you still care about, or promotion, you still care about their opinion, helping understand how you can help them meet their goals. But a lot of that is going to come down to the culture and existing relationships. Marcy, is anything else popping into your mind there?
No, I don't think so. I think one of the things that is unfortunately one of the luxuries of being a manager is to try to preemptively talk about when changes are going to happen on a team and why changes are happening. Sometimes multiple people are interested in the same type of position or opportunity. And so managing that well with rationale, I think, becomes really key. But sometimes multiple people aren't interested, and it's still, I think, a bit on the manager, if depending on the culture you want for your team. Again, it is the responsibility for a manager to talk through the changes with people that it impacts before that happens. But managers are human too. And so that does not always happen, and it does not always happen well. And so then I think that it is really beholden on people who have working relationships to be okay having that difficult conversation. If it's difficult, to say, hey, I'm really proud of you, or I'm really excited about this. I would love it if, we can continue to work and partner, or X, Y, and Z. And that can come from either way, right? It doesn't have to be the person that didn't get the promotion or the new title, but it also can be, right? It can be either party, the one, and so I would just think about when you get promoted or when you're the person who didn't get promoted, there are ways to be really gracious about maintaining a good work relationship with people, because 9 times out of 10, it will really matter how people view you. And some of jealousy is misunderstanding, which is now you think you're better than the rest of us. And a lot of times it just takes a little conversation and a reminder to say, I'm really excited about this, but I know like this was a team effort, or I know that I'm going to really still need to work with you all, or what have you. And so I think it's more about relationships and how people manage relationships than anything else. And again, we're all human, and so we don't always do that really well.
Yes. Thank you. And again, that would be a great, if there is a specific situation, a great thing to discuss in an hour session where we can talk through all the dynamics and things that have happened in the past and how things have, transpired so far in that new role.
We've got a couple more minutes. If you have any additional questions, feel free to still pop them in there. We are also recording this webinar. So if for some reason you left early or still need to jump or what have you, recognize we will get it on our website probably, I'll say by the end of this week. It may be sooner, but the end of the week gives us just a, oops, something went wrong kind of thing, so that you all aren't concerned if it doesn't pop up tomorrow. And I'm again want to be respectful of everyone's time. So we've got a couple more minutes if there are any questions remaining.
And thank you so much for all the questions that came in advance. That was really helpful in terms of, shaping the content. Hopefully we got to the majority of them. And if you attend future sessions, please do continue to share your thoughts in advance. And I'm thrilled we had so many people on today, and hope to hear from you guys and have some coaching sessions soon.